Hello guys, welcome again to my channel. My name is Mercy. If you're new here, this channel I do pattern making, sewing, and DIYs. Okay? If this is something you like and if it's something you're interested in learning or watching, please consider subscribing. Today's tutorial is going to be the recreation of the viral dress from. So I did put up a poll on my channel for you guys to vote. When I saw two of those dresses, they both look so good and I didn't know which one to pick or which one to recreate. So based on the poll, the dress that had most votes was the one with the corset and the flare details on the side. And yes, I did see you guys come in asking me to do both, but I can't do both in this particular tutorial. So that will be something I'll do in another tutorial. And then maybe turn it into a top or something similar, but definitely with the top neckline detail, since we're going to be doing the bottom detail on the corset dress, so that I don't have two similar dresses. And to everyone who participated in the poll, thank you guys so much. Let's get right into today's tutorial. Here are the materials I'll be using. 4 yards of stretched twill fabric and about 1 yard of knit lining. Everything will be linked in the description down below. So to make extra copies of my pattern, I like to use this tracing paper. I find it easier to use than the tracing wheel because even after using the tracing wheel, you still end up marking out those lines. So this way just makes it a little easier. I'll also be linking that in the description, so if you want to check it out. As usual, I'm starting off with my basic blocks. I'm just going to label the lines. Now the next step is to turn this into a dress block. So basically I'm going to measure from the neck point down to the bottom of the paper the length of my dress. And because it's a midi dress, I'm going to use 50 inches. So here my paper measured at 51 inches. So I'll just leave that because of the hem allowance. So 50 inches plus 1 inch for the hem. Next I'm going to mark from the hip line and connect it to the bottom of the paper. And then measure the hip width and then take that same measurement at the bottom and then connect like so. Now the same process applies to the back. So before drawing any style line on the pattern, I'm going to ease off 1/2 inch of my seam allowance. Now mostly because my fabric is stretchy. Now taking off 1/2 inch on the side seam is going to accommodate for the stretch on my fabric. Now this you can do based on how stretchy your fabric is. If your fabric has a lot of stretch, you can take more than 1/2 inch. So here, after marking out the 1/2 inch out, I'm just going to shade that portion out for now, but I'm going to cut it off later on in the process. To mark the drop waist, I'm going to take 3 inches down from the waistline on the side seam. Now this measurement can be based on how low you want the waistline to drop. So you can start at about 2 inches and go to about 3 inches. In this case, I'll be using 3 inches as the drop waist. Now I'm just going to basically mark and do the same on the back part of the pattern. After marking the drop waist, the next thing to mark is the slant on the side of the dress. Now this measurement can be as slanted as you like and as close to the center front as you like. In this case, I measured 1.5 inch from my dot. Now from that last point, I'm going to connect to the side seam to draw my slanted line. Again, from that 1.5 inch, I'm going to connect all the way down to the hemline. Towards the hemline, you can decide to leave it straight or give it a little bit of slant. So here I didn't use a specific measurement to achieve the slant. I basically just marked it based on how I preferred it to look. Now looking at the center gap, I ended up having 4.5 inch width as the center of my gap. Again, you can always mark this at whatever width you prefer. So moving on to the back, I'm going to repeat the same process. Drop the waistline with 3 inches and then extend the slanted line 1.5 inch away from my dot. Connect to the 1.5 inch and reconnect back to the hemline, also slanting it. So here I'm just noting the side front and the side back because once we cut this pattern on flare, it might look similar. So you want to make sure the back and the front is marked properly. On the sides of the pattern, I'm going to mark my slash lines. Now this can be as many lines as you want based on how much fullness you want on the waist or based on how full you want the flare to be. But here I'm going to use 3 lines on the back and also 3 lines on the front. So here I'm just relabeling my pattern and also putting arrows to indicate the points where my seam allowance will be added. And before marking the necklines on the back of the pattern and the front as well, I'm going to go ahead and cut the pattern out. To mark the neckline, I'm going to measure 9 inches from the base of the neck. And using my French curve, I'm going to connect from the side of the armhole down to the neck depth. So because it's a strapless dress, I like to shape right over the neckline just for extra tightness. So I'm going to use 1 cm both ways on the sides of the dart as the tightening. You can either use 1 cm or 1/4 of an inch. Now from those points, I'm just going to connect back to the waistline. Next, I'm going to cut the pattern through the new neckline. Now you want to make sure you keep the top part of the pattern, mostly because this is what you're going to use to determine the length of the strap on the dress. Moving on to the front of the pattern, I'm going to measure the shoulder to underbust length. In this case, my shoulder to underbust was 14¼ inch, which is the same as 36 centimeters. Now whenever I make anything that has to do with a cupped corset or a cupped bustier, I like to minus 2 cm from the underbust length. So after taking out the 2 cm or 3/4 of an inch, my new underbust length is going to be 13½ inch, which is the same as 34 cm. Now from that point, I'm going to rule a short line across to shape the underbust. In this case, I'll be using 2 cm as the underbust shaping. Now based on the size of the bust, this measurement can start at 1.5 cm to about 3 cm, or start at 3/4 of an inch to about 1 inch or 1¼ inch max. Next, I'm going to connect the waist dart to the shoulder dart and mark my point X. Point X is usually the fullest part of the bust, and this is where your bust sits in. To mark the neckline depth, I'm going to measure from the base of the neck. Here I'll be using 6 inches as the depth. Now from this point, I'm going to mark the center gap between the cups. Now I'll be using 1/2 inch here. Also, this measurement can go from about 1/2 inch to about 3/4 of an inch based on how wide you want the gap to be. Another way of marking your neckline depth is using your underwire as a guide. So basically, you're just going to place it on the underbust and then just mark. So from the underbust shaping, I'm just going to go ahead and draw out the bust curve. For an extra cinch around the waistline, I'm going to widen the waist dart. I'll be using about 0.5 cm or 1/4 of an inch. Then draw the new dart by connecting from the underbust shaping down to the waistline and finally to the bottom of the dart. Next, I'm going to cut through the new dart line so that I'm able to fold the shoulder dart to draw the neckline and mark out the cups. So to draw the cups, I'm going to start by marking out the side seam. In this case, my side seam is 1/2 inch. Now if you're working with a pattern that does not have the seam allowance included on the block, then you can start marking from directly on the side. Now from that point, I'm going to mark 3.5 cm. Now this is just a guide for drawing the cups. Now this measurement can start from 3.5 cm to about 5 cm. So you can use about 3.5 cm for medium to large bust sizes and then 5 cm for small to the smallest bust sizes. To draw out the cups, you want to make sure you're using the wider French curve as opposed to the smaller one. Using the wider French curve will give your cups a round finish. Next, I'm going to draw out the cups. So I like to first mark it with a pencil just in case there's any errors that I have to correct. Now to draw the side of the cups, I'm going to connect from the underbust shaping to the 3.5 cm which I measured from the side seam. So I'm going to place it like so and then just connect up onto the armhole. Now after that, I'm going to connect the neckline down to the side of the armhole as well. I'm going to open the shoulder darts again so that I'm able to shape the oval bust, just for extra tightening around the chest. So on the side towards the CF, I'm going to shape it with 1.5 cm, and on the other side towards the armhole, I'm going to take it back with 1 cm. So that is 2.5 cm in total for the oval bust shaping. You can also use 1 inch by taking ½ inch on both sides. It'll still be the same. Now after marking those points, I'm going to close the shoulder dart again through the new points that I just marked, and then redraw the final neckline. So once I'm okay with the way I've drawn my cups, I'm going to now use my pen to finalize the markings. After marking the neckline, I'm going to open the shoulder darts again and now connect from the new oval bust shaping to the point X, which is the fullest part of the bust. Now one final thing I like to do on the cups after marking it out is to match it up with the underwire that I intend to use. I like to make sure the roundness of the cup matches with the underwire. Now if I place it side by side, if there's any little detail that is off, I can then readjust like I'm doing here. Now before I cut out my cups, I'm going to bring in the back pattern so that I'm able to mark the length of the strap. So what I do is I place the shoulder of the back to the shoulder of the front, overlap with about ½ inch, although this is optional. I personally just like to do this so that the strap sits firm around the shoulder. Now after overlapping, I can then mark the final length of the strap. And also remember to include your seam allowance when cutting it out. I ended up using a velvet ribbon for my strap instead, mostly because I wanted more coverage around the shoulder. And it also matches the polka dot detail on the fabric. So here I'm going to cut out my pattern so that I'll be able to mark the 3-part detail on the cup. So I'm going to go ahead and tape the cups along the bust curve. Mark 1 3/4 inch as the width for the top part of the cup. Then mark along that line and cut through. So at this point, the pattern making process is done. The next thing to do is to place out the patterns and cut on the fabric. But here's one final look of the patterns before we cut. So this is the back part. Here I have 3 pieces. So I'm going to label 1B, 2B, and 3B. Also same for the front. When cutting out the patterns on the fabric, I like to start by first cutting the largest piece of the pattern. In this case, it's going to be the side detail of the dress, which has the gathered and the flare effect. So here there's 2 layers of fabric. Now the middle line I've marked is the bias green. Because it's a flare detail, I like to cut that on bias. I'm going to draw another line on top of the pattern just as a guide for slanting the waist when I'm spreading out. I'm also going to number each of the slash lines. So this is what the side piece looks like after cutting. Now note you can spread as wide as you want and add as much fullness as you like. So the new side seam of this part will be this center line that I marked. Now this is the line where I'll be adding the inner pocket. I'm going to notch the top part and then from that point mark the length of the inner pocket. So from the top I measured about 1.5 inch. Now from that point in here I think I used about 6.5 inch. I'm going to notch the center front of the side piece so that it's easy for me to know at what point it's going to be at when I'm sewing. Next, I'm going to separate the side piece through the center line. Now, if you don't want to add an inseam pocket, there's no need to separate the pieces. I'm only doing this because the dress did have a pocket. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut the remaining pattern pieces. I'm going to make sure my seam allowances are included, my zip allowance, and also cut them on the lining. Now here I'm going to cut the other pieces on the lining except the side piece. So for the bigger piece, the lining is going to stop at the hip line on the center back and on the center front. Next, I'm going to cut the boning to match the dot line on the front and on the back, making sure ½ inch is excluded on top and on the bottom. So to start sewing, I'm going to pin each of my pieces together. So here I'm joining both the lining and the fabric of the back pieces. Also the same for the front. Now for the cups, I went ahead to add a layer of interfacing. I won't be using any type of bra foam for this, it's just going to be the fabric and the interfacing for the cups. Again, I'm going to pin in place and basically just sew all with ½ inch. Now at this point, all my seams were done. I've already pressed them out, both the front and the back and the cups. Now before I go ahead and attach the boning to the lining, I like to first press it flat and tape both ends. So at this point, I've already attached the boning to the lining along the dot lines. Next, I'm going to pin the sides of the lining side by side and sew out 1 inch as the seam allowance, as well as the actual fabric. So here both side seams of the actual fabric and the lining has been done and also pressed. Next, I'm going to lay the lining over the fabric and pin along the neckline. I'm going to sew along the neckline with ½ inch in top stitch. So here's what it looks like already sewn and pressed. Now over the neckline, I did attach a layer of interfacing just to further keep the neckline from stretching. So the one used here is a ½ inch one-sided interfacing. So here I'm just pinning around the part where I'll be attaching the cups. I'm pinning in place because I want to run a stitch around that point to also keep it from stretching. I also did the same to the side of the dress where the gathered detail will be added. Before facing the cups, I'm going to attach the ribbon strap to it. So I cut out 4 pieces of ribbons and I used about 28 inches for the length. It can be shorter than this or longer based on how you like it. After facing the top of the cups, I'm going to run a basting stitch around. I'm going to slightly pull around it just to keep the roundness in place. Now make sure there are no visible gathers after pulling. I'm going to pin the cups in place, making sure the seams align under the bust. And then sew with ½ inch. After joining the cups, I'm going to top stitch. Now here I decided not to use the underwire bias because the fabric was already looking too thick. So here I just trimmed off the bottom seam allowance and just top stitch from the front of the fabric. Now you want to make sure your top stitch is small enough to fit in your underwire. Now once the cups is sewn in, I'm going to insert the underwire. If you're using an uneven underwire, make sure the shorter part is sitting towards the CF. So I'm going to insert the underwire all the way to the top of the neckline on the CF and then just finish whatever is left towards the side. The other 2 ribbon straps will be attached to the back around the same level I attached it on the front. So moving on to the side details of the dress, I'm going to first start by cutting out my pocket bag for my inseam pocket. So here I used about 8 inches as the width of the opening, and I cut out 4 pieces. So here I have both the front and the back side of the flare detail. Here I'm going to just notch the points where I want to attach the pocket bag, and I'm going to pin it 1 inch higher than the notch and stitch it down with about 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch on all 4 sides. At this point, I've attached all the pocket bags to the 4 sides, and I've also pressed the seams. Next, I'm going to pin one side of the front and one side of the back. After pinning side by side, I'm going to go ahead and sew the side seams like so. So here's what it looks like after my side seams have been sewn. Next, I'm just going to go ahead and press. Next, I'm going to run 2 lines of basting stitch along the top of the sides. Now this is where I'm going to gather. Here's what it looks like already gathered. The part with the double notch is the part that goes towards the CF. Next, I'm going to pin the side details of the dress to the main part of the dress. After pinning, I'm going to sew down with 1/2 an inch, just following the shapes around the sides. Now towards the sharp corner on the sides, I'm going to make a notch so it's easy for me to pivot my fabric and continue my seam. If you've made it far to this point of the tutorial, thank you so much for sticking around. Please go ahead and give this video a thumbs up if anything has been helpful to you so far. Also, subscribe if you haven't, and if you're already subscribed, thank you so much. Here's what it looks like after I've attached it. And I'm just going to repeat the same process to the other side of the dress. Now after finishing the side seam, I made sure to overlock the edges. And next I installed my zipper and the other 2 straps to the back of the dress. And also finished the hemline. So guys, we've officially made it to the end of this tutorial, and here's another final look of the dress. I loved how it turned out, especially the straps and the metal zipper in the back. I really enjoyed making this tutorial, and I hope you guys loved it too. Let me know in the comments what your favorite part of this tutorial was. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!